SMG Oasis.
You know, I suggest that we get some of those little bells, you know, like a bell,
SMG
bell
Oasis.
where you go do that.
No, I hope we are not doing,
Oh, I'm already on.
because I was at RCTC yesterday. It's a night.
Oh, this computer screen?
SMG Oasis.
There's a computer screen, there's an iPad, there's a
SMG Oasis.
Yeah, and it's all over. I didn't know how to vote, I didn't know how.
Okay. You guys ready? Yes. Ready? I call to order the Thursday, May the 11th, 2017 special meeting of the Palm Springs City Council. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Please place your hand over your heart and join me in the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. Next item is the acceptance of the agenda. Do we have, roll call, please. City Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Coors?
Here.
Councilmember Mills? Councilmember Roberts?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Fote? Mayor Moon?
Here.
All present.
Thank you, Ms. Hart. Next item is the acceptance of the agenda. Do we have a motion to accept the agenda as printed?
So moved.
Motions are made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none in opposition, the agenda is accepted as printed. And to remind everyone, tonight is a presentation from Mark Rios Clemente Hale Studios on the Downtown Park. They will make a presentation followed by public comments. And if anyone wishes to speak tonight for 2 minutes, please put a card in to the city clerk over here as quickly as possible so she can get those together. And then we'll have a city council discussion, and then we'll have council member comments. So with that, Mr. Rios, you're on.
Great. Thank you, Council.
Hey, guys. Mark.
I'm sorry, just a minute.
Hi, Mark.
Jamie, can you make it a little warmer in here? Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Rios.
Thank you very much. We're very excited to be here tonight to have a discussion with you and with the public here about the park in downtown Palm Springs. I'm here with 3 of my associates from Rios Clemente Hale Studios. The goal of tonight really is to start talking about big ideas. And we're presenting 3 potential schemes for the park tonight, and one of them are embedded with different ideas about program, about concept, and about experience. None of the projects you see tonight are actually a final design, and various parts of one project or another project may all come together. But through our experience, we find that actually presenting designs, letting people comment on them, is a much quicker way to get some real discussion going. So today is really about getting everyone's thoughts and opinions through these designs as a vehicle for those discussions. I think it's important to sort of iterate for everyone, what are the real goals of the project? And we've identified 6 goals that we use as a test for every single one of the design moves we make. Number 1 is to foster a strong sense of community for the city. Number 2 is to provide flexibility so a variety of different kinds of activities can happen. 3, to create a cooling respite place. The real soul of a park in the middle of a downtown area is to have that sense of green, a cool resting place. Number 4, to promote sustainability. Number 5, to connect with nature. And number 6 is to create an iconic destination for Palm Springs. And so these are our goals and our sort of measuring sticks for all our work, to go back and say, how is it relating, how is it supporting, how do we evaluate it against these criteria? All of you in Palm Springs know how important fostering community is. And so trying to make a place that can serve many program needs and have lots of options is really important. And the flexibility about how it can be set up, how it can be used, having the right amount of infrastructure so that people can plug in electricity and sound, all those things are essential to making it a successful place. We really want to make this park a place that you can have individual quiet moments. Now, these aren't spaces that are hidden or tucked away, but they're spaces that are not programmed, that are shady, that allow places for individuals or small groups to gather and just enjoy being outside. We're avidly committed to a project that's very sustainable, and so we'll be continually testing throughout the entire project issues of water use, of shade. I'm sure we'll use some solar devices in some of our lighting. So making this a model sustainable project for the city is essential to us. This is the opportunity to really connect downtown to nature. You're connected in such a powerful way throughout the city by the view of the mountains, but at this opportunity we can let the mountains leak down into the downtown grid. And so I'm trying to promote that connection to the outdoors, which is so essential, I think, to the character of Palm Springs, is an important goal for the park. And finally, to create some place that's unique and memorable and iconic. This should be the next contribution to your amazing collection of architecture and landscape architecture in the city. And our goal is to do something at a level of quality and a level of discipline and beauty that it becomes a place that people really want to come and use, but also to see and experience. To make a great park, I think that you really need to study other parks to find out what parks are successful and what makes them really work. Most of us have all been in Central Park in New York, and there are a lot of reasons why it works. A variety of spaces, sense of shade and sun, the views that surround it, how it's programmed. Lots of lessons in a very miniature kind of way can be taken from Central Park and applied to Palm Springs. The High Line in New York is wildly successful. One of the key lessons about the High Line is that it's a promenade. It connects things. And so here we're really trying to find a way the park will connect downtown with the museum, with Palm Canyon. It's really a link. And so the High Line as a connective piece of urban fabric is a great sort of precedent for us when we think about the park. Gasworks Park in Seattle, the topography is really fundamental to the experience of the place. Right now the ground plane is basically flat, but we have the potential to do some grading on it, and we can bring in some soil and move some soil. I think that we're all interested in creating a sense of variety of experiences, and so the ability to sort of get up a little higher or maybe go down some really takes it and makes it not an urban place. It lets the landscape come into the city and create that kind of natural environment. The new park in Santa Monica, again, has a really great set of experiences, really a wonderful plant palette, but also has a few pieces of iconic architecture, these shade structures. And so shade really is an important element for any successful park in Palm Springs. And so perhaps incorporated into the park will be some iconic pieces of architecture that really become important to the overall character of the place and distinguish it as a memorable experience. One of the things that I particularly love about this park in Sydney is that you feel like you're in a naturalized, natural environment because of the way water works and rocks move and things are sort of soft in plan. It's not particularly geometric. It doesn't feel as if it's man-made, although it is. And so there may be some experiences like this brought into the park so that it feels like parts of the landscape may have been there before the city. There may be some sort of memory of the original landscape in the park. Another important lesson we learn and we study a lot is how big the park is compared to other places in the world. The Palm Springs Park is about half an acre. It's a really nice size urban park. And when you look at a whole series of other spaces around Los Angeles, whether it's the LA Zoo, Grand Park in Los Angeles, La Plaza de Artes and Cultura, you can see how big we are compared to those kinds of places. And the immediate lessons to be learned are program, the size of activities, how much shade, how much open space, what are associated program facilities, are there bathrooms, what's lighting like, and so we spend a lot of time cataloging and understanding all these other places as case studies so that the designs that we'll be presenting to you are thoughtful and hopefully tested and will really work. I think it's also important to dream big. And so these are some other parks across the country, in San Francisco and Boston and Paris. And so those spaces are really important, I think, to also include in our case studies. Now, the climate may be different on a lot of these, but there's still the same fundamental issues going on. How people get together, where they sit, how you make big spaces, how you make small spaces. So these are all lessons that we brought into our designs. For those of you who got here before our meeting, we had some tables set up in the front, and there were some exercises that we were asking everyone's opinions about. And basically, there are three components today of the park design we'd really like to talk about and focus on. The first one is, what's the story of the park? That architecture and landscape architecture have the ability through their content to convey meanings and ideas and history and tradition. And so the park has to be beautiful, it has to work, but it also has to have a story. And so we want the story to be authentic to Palm Springs, something that's worth telling. And so today we're going to talk about some different ideas for stories. And we'd like your input on which ones you think fit, which ones may not fit. And you may have some other stories that may inspire us and inspire the design. Program is essential. The exercise on the table had all these different program pieces, and we were asking everyone to sort of prioritize and put them down. The quickest thing you learn is you can't put all the pieces down. And so you can't have everything in the park. It just isn't big enough. And so trying to figure out what this place should be about, how many program pieces should be in it, which ones can fit next to each other, is a task that we all do together. But what's essential to sort of admit is to say, we can't do it all. What's important here? And so that exercise of program is to help that thinking process. And finally, what's the character of this place? And the character needs to support the story, the character needs to support the program. And so we had lots of photographs for people to identify what character of outdoor places they feel might be right for this park. And when we start combining all these things together, the story, the program, and the character, a very unique design will evolve. And the exciting part about the design process is we really don't know what it is yet. We have some ideas, but the best and most appropriate park for Palm Springs will come out of a really clear understanding of those three things. What's its content, what's its story, what's its program, and what's its character. So here are those boards, and if any of you have a moment after our presentation tonight to go and add more comments, we'd really appreciate that. We want to make a public, transparent record of this meeting and to really understand all the things we've talked about. And if we can have another meeting like this, we'll actually then track and show you how the input we've heard tonight has inspired or informed the design process. And this board was the one that's associated with all those photographs, and it really talks about what's the experience. Is it sculptural? Is it natural? Is it architectural? Is it open and flat? What are your preconceptions? And those ideas may evolve and change as we all learn more, but what are your preconceptions about this park? I think it's really important to say that these processes of designing a public park are always long, and that we've gone through a lot of designs collectively, the public and the council, I've been a part of some of them, to get where we are tonight. And all of those iterations have been important. And in no way are we starting over. We don't need to start over. We're building on all the work that's happened over the last 2 years. All the input from a variety of designers and engineers, the council, all is valued and incorporated. And so I really quickly just want to show you a variety of schemes, because as we look back on them, there are lessons that are important to sort of identify. And again, none of these schemes are sort of the final solution, but I think it's good for all of us to see what the evolution of ideas are and see what ideas are sort of consistent and which ones may vary. So this is the first scheme that I was a part of, and this was about 2 years ago. And it really looking at the main goal of connecting Palm Canyon and the museum and how a park might be laid out. And this was a second scheme that was really looking at changing the views and the way you move through the park. And this was really trying to bring the mountains in a much more kind of dynamic way into the city so that all the buildings around it were part of the city grid, but the park itself started changing its forms. Another scheme that was studied about 2 years ago is really how do you do this kind of performance place, whether it's a lawn or other materials, and what are all the support things you would need to make performances happen in a productive and easy way. This scheme also, I think that one of the really important lessons was looking at how you could take the streets and really make a kind of public gathering place that incorporated the museum and the park, and maybe it's better to actually make the event place in the street, whether it's there or whether it's right there, as opposed to in the middle of the park. And so those were issues that this scheme was evaluating. This particular scheme combined a lot of those ideas. It looked at these kind of paths that moved in different ways through the park. It also looked at the performance areas. This was an early idea which has developed more in subsequent schemes about maybe 2 performance areas. This scheme was really weighing heavily on sort of more active performance usage of the park, where some of the prior schemes were much more open sort of landscape schemes. This fifth scheme was a very soft scheme. This was probably the most naturalized scheme we looked at, of letting the garden just kind of flow into the park, and you moved around it, and there was probably some topography, there were shade pockets, and I think that there are a lot of really wonderful things about this scheme. One of the things to always note is the more you have typically organic and soft forms and big masses of trees, the less flexible it may be. And so there's always this balance between how much event space do you have and how flat is it and how garden and park-like it is. And so that's something we're trying to sort of examine, and we're, in a way trying to do both. We want to have a place you could have an event in, but most importantly, it needs to be a garden in the middle of the city. This was a scheme that was done 2 summers ago by really a strong team, really saying, how would you take and realize that idea of an event place? And so it explored all the kinds of components you might need as far as toilet facilities, concessions, tickets, back of house, how would it be arranged? How could you make the park still be used when there wasn't an event there? So this particular scheme was more heavily event-oriented as opposed to garden-oriented. And this was sort of the last scheme of the group, and it again tried to combine a lot of those things. It still had event places, but it was a little lighter on building forms, and it had more sort of garden shade areas in it. Its capacity was much smaller for events. And so this scheme went through a whole series of pricing exercises with the larger team members, and we learned a lot from that. And so what all this means is right now we're in a really good place that I think collectively can make really good decisions. We have some idea about money and budget. We have some idea about where things might want to be located. We have ideas about connections and circulation and where shade may want to happen. And so the last 8 schemes here, or 7 schemes, in a way are like the homework you do before you really start making more final decisions. And these were some of the views, some of the ideas for shade structure, sort of a desert flower idea that were part of that scheme. So our next steps, as I mentioned, for our process is to take test fits of what a story might be, test fits of what a program might be, and test fits of what the character of the park might be. And we've developed 3 schemes that have different ways of looking at those 3 ideas. And those are the ideas I think we're asking all of you to help us think about in today's discussion. So scheme number 1, which you saw in the front of the room, was an idea that this is really a meeting place. This is a common ground. People have come to Palm Springs for decades and decades and decades for a communal experience. And today, whether it's the film festival or Modernism Week, that sort of sense of community and coming together is very, very important. And so this park was really in support of that idea of common ground. And when you look at the design of this, you'll see a couple things right away, that it has a fairly large open space in the middle of it, sort of like Central Park. Right now we're showing it as green. It may not all be green, but it allows a lot of flexibility to how it can be used and programmed. Another distinguishing feature of this scheme is that we've moved sort of the plaza down to the museum end, and there might be a water feature here and a shade structure, might come up from the parking garage. This becomes sort of an entry area, and so we're really using this activity space as the magnet on the other end of the park. So in some of our other studies, this was sort of the main place. This scheme is saying maybe this should be the main place, so that it really makes this strong connection and makes this link between Palm Canyon and the museum with sort of the park at this location. We all know that to make a park in this climate work, we need lots of shade, and so there's some dense shade canopies around the edges. There are also some shade structures, 3 shade structures in this particular scheme that provide year-round, areas of seating and sort of gathering. We're using topography here. The slope rises up, and there are some sort of benches and seating that have ways you can occupy them. So the park, I think, functions as a daily park with lots of really great shaded spaces for people to hang out. But this scheme says, let's dedicate a lot of space so we have the potential for using it for a lot of events too. This is the entry to the parking garage, and we're saying this might be a place in this scheme where we're locating some park restrooms. But you'll see there are all these sort of diagonal path movements going through the park. And what's really nice about these diagonal path movements are, from an experience, you get these really great long angled views. Most of the experience of being downtown are walking orthogonally along the sides of buildings, along the grid. And I think we don't want the park experience to have those experiences. And just by angling the paths and moving them and changing them, it really reinforces this as a break in the city, as a respite, and as a garden. One last thing about this scheme's common ground is in this one we have the Lumiere House in this location, and we're trying to site it in this scheme like it was really designed. So it was designed with a north, south, west, and east elevation, and so we're siting it like that. We used to have a drive-through garage, and so we're maybe thinking about changing the paving so that it symbolically shows how you could drive through it. So this particular scheme says, let's put the Lumiere House right out in front, let's give it lots of visibility, and let's make it really authentic as far as how it was designed and what its position should be. On all of our schemes, we're doing this sort of scale where we can compare them between large event capacity and small scale experience. So scheme 1 looks like it's sort of 75% flexible larger spaces and 25% sort of smaller, quieter landscape moments. And these are just some images of what that might be like. Again, some stepped areas for seating, but also that helps some of the performance. We're always looking back into the history of landscape architecture, and that helps us sort of think about the future. This is Lawrence Halprin, Garrett Ekbo, an amazing California landscape architect. It was really a part of the case study movement, which was so important here in Palm Springs. So we're letting some of his work help also inspire us for the future. We're not going to copy it, but it can help inspire us. And some of the pavilions and shade structures that could be associated with this common ground scheme, and some preliminary plant palettes. The second scheme pursues a really different kind of big idea, a reason for being. And that's the idea that Palm Springs has always been a place of healing. And we can look at Palm Springs for 50 years, this place for 100 years or more, because of the hot springs, because of the weather, because of the air, the sun. People have come here to heal and to promote health. So this could be a really big idea for the park also. And it may be structured around these ideas of really making a healthy place. And that could be, shown through, for example, this is just areas for yoga, different kinds of exercise. Maybe the water feature might have some of these kind of memories of these springs that the design for this particular park really looks at trying to make a large garden and to really organize it around this idea of a healing place in the city. Again, it has a lot of the same components, but then some really different ones. Here we're saying the main gathering space is down at this end. We have a limited amount of lawn, not a lot, but we're saying in this scheme we wanted to put it on both sides of the street as opposed to just on one side of the street. So it really starts linking the intersection together. The park has a lot of paths you can move through. There are places for other kinds of events. These are shade structures, and so you could have sort of events or things happening underneath those shade structures. We're also looking at potential different spaces if the Maryland statue is located here. And so this one shows it being along Bellardo. You'll see in other schemes, we're sort of test fitting if it should go here as a location, which we'll, I'm sure, hear more about. All of these forms are all sort of a very lightweight shade structure. We're trying to make a landscape that will kind of, in a way, cloak the parking garage, but also be a place you can hang out and sort of look across the park. So this idea of placemaking that has a lot of shade is really important to scheme number 2. And let me go back to that. Here you can see the main gathering or event space is really in front of the museum. It's at that intersection. It could be that you would just close this part of the street, which allows any future development still to have access. Or you could close a bigger area depending on what the event might be and traffic patterns. And this particular design is more equally weighted between sort of larger event capacity and sort of a garden park. It's about half and half. And some of the images that this park could be about, I think this park might be the most quote-unquote natural looking, really soft, flowing. It might look like the city kind of build up around this area of landscape. It doesn't mean, again, that we're going to imitate nature. We're going to be inspired by nature. And if we pursued that scheme, I think if there are shade structure, other kinds of build forms, they'd all want to have more of a naturalized character as opposed to a more architectural character. And that particular design would probably have a more of a wide variety of plant material as opposed to a tighter palette, again, to try to create a really soft, naturalized garden. The last idea we're exploring in this series of schemes was, what if you made the park really a sculpture garden? It seems that its relationship to the museum and also Palm Springs as a destination of art and culture, this might be an appropriate story to pursue. And so we've started looking at, the various pieces of land art, the Illuminaire House, pieces within the museum's collection, and in some way, would they just inspire what the design of this park might be about? So this scheme looks at the landscape in a much more sculptural way. Planes of earth are sort of tilted up and down. There are lots of areas here for seating. These are all sort of sloped areas which sort of look into the park. Really long water feature. Again, shade structures at multiple locations. And it has much more of a feeling as if in some sort of way the mountains sort of filtered down into the city. So there's a direct connection here between the skyline of the mountains and the ground plane of the park below. And this scheme shows that it probably has, of the 3 schemes, the smallest event capacity and the largest number of sort of smaller garden park-like spaces. And so I think one of our goals tonight is to hear everyone's thought on that. How do we weigh this as opposed to creating a park that's really a series of gardens, or a park that really has the ability for lots of events, and how do you balance those two concerns? And some images of what a park like that might be like. This is a park in Seattle. Some of you may have been to it, and it's really an amazing place to move through it. And I think one of its strengths is, again, you're moving at cross angles to the city, you're getting different oblique views of the mountains, and within that, there could be a whole series of sculptural paths, like this image, that you might move through the park, have a whole different series of planting experiences. This is a really an interesting piece of architecture and landscape architecture in Lincoln Center. And they just pulled up the corner of one of these planes, and they stuck a cafe. But we're doing a project right now for the city of Santa Monica, turning their airport into a park, which is very controversial. But we're putting all the park buildings underneath planes like that you can occupy. So in that park, we're putting like the bathroom and the storage room and things, kind of tuck them under the landscape so that it doesn't feel like there's a building sitting in the park, but those buildings kind of tuck within the park. And again, the kinds of placemaking, the kinds of canopies might all be inspired by pieces of art, and they might also be curated and rotating. This might be a place where there's a whole series of installation pieces that are cycled through the park that would actually perform a very strong program aspect. They would really be useful, needed places. And its program, or its plant palette, for example, might be much more sculptural. And I'm looking at plant material that would make a really strong form. So this is really a series of brainstorming. We've taken all the brainstorming and tried to apply them in various schemes so you can see how those ideas might turn out if we really pursued them. But tonight, we'd love to hear from the council and all of you here tonight on really those three areas. If you have some idea what this park should be about, what is its reason for being, what's its identity, how much programming should it have versus how much just sort of garden space, and lastly, do you have a sense of what's the genuine, appropriate feeling for the park here? What's the experience of it? So thank you very much for your time. We're really looking forward to hearing all your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Rios. We're going to have public comments followed by city council discussions, but we have a subcommittee that's been working on this for a long time with Mr. Rios. Is Councilmember Roberts and Councilmember Mills are on that subcommittee. Would you like to make any comments before we go into public comments?
You can do a little update. Who's going to do it?
Other than just that this is the first step, is a step that was that we've been looking forward to letting the public see where we've been. Not that we've been working in a vacuum or anything, but this is an opportunity to get your input based on what Mark has shown us. And Mark has done a lot of things to tease you here, and and I think we've kind of looked at it like we started up with a project that was, by the time it was totaled, we put everything in it we could possibly want, and that I think that the project cost on that was somewhere around $11 million, and this council has toned that down to a real fundable number that we've already agreed upon, and that's a little over $5 million. And Mark understands that. And please bear in mind that Mark has shown us some really interesting stuff, but I keep remembering there's that $5 million number there, and Mark understands that too, and Mark's and his firm know exactly how to get to that number. So we're counting on him to help us get the best for our money and get the uses that you all think is important in this park and get it functional the way it was intended to be. So this, like I said, this is the first step. We'll have another public step after this when we go a little further, and then the council can have to go to work.
I think you covered everything. The only thing I would add is that we have a great opportunity temporarily. So the Michael Braun, who's the developer of the downtown project, has offered a gift to the city. And that gift is that he will temporarily create, well, maybe somewhat permanently, some irrigation for this and plant grass or do something temporary so that while we're working this out over the next year, we'll actually be able to use that park. And he's hoping, I think, to get that done in the next few months, realistically, maybe by the end of the summer. So it won't be anything of what we're looking at today, but it'll be a way for us to actually be down there, maybe have a few events in it, kind of see how it feels, and as we go through the design process, it'll come from a place of actually getting to spend time in it, see its view lines, and see how we like using it, see what the sounds are like. So I think that's a great opportunity for us, but I think Chris covered everything else.
Okay, with that, we will open for public comments, then we'll have city council discussion. So anyone who wishes to speak and you haven't turned in a card yet, please turn it in to the city clerk over here, Ms. Hart. Our first speaker is, each speaker will have 2 minutes, and please talk only on the subject of the downtown park. Our first speaker is Jeb Bonner from the Palm Springs Art Museum, and then Brooke Hodge, also for the Palm Springs Art Museum.
Good evening, Mayor Moon, council members, and concerned residents. And thank you, Mark, for a very thoughtful and inspiring presentation, and your staff for being here today. I'm Jeb Bonner, the Deputy Director at the Palm Springs Art Museum, and I'm pleased to have with me today Melissa Hempel, who is our new Manager of Community Programs on her second day on the job. And also with me is Leonardo Bravo, our Director of Education and Public Programs, now a veteran at 9 months. Their goal is to break down the often formidable flight of steps, whether physical or emotional, to the temple of art that is our building. To bring the museum, its collections and programs out into the greater Coachella Valley, and in turn to invite all residents and visitors of the valley to visit the museum. And so we're especially gratified to see the focus of the park move westward to the face of the museum. We see the downtown park as an integral part of those plans, being that it will be our front yard. We look forward to working with the city on planning events, programs, and installations that can bring a sense of place and action to downtown Palm Springs, and for the park to become the center of Palm Springs, a gathering place for all of its residents and visitors. We are very excited to have Mark Rios working on the park because we know his track record means that the design will fit into the iconic architectural heritage that makes Palm Springs unique home and destination that it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonner. Next is Brooke Hodge, Palm Springs Art Museum, followed by David Vogel of Palm Springs.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor Moon and council members. I'm Brooke Hodge, Director of Architecture and Design at the Palm Springs Art Museum. I've been in the field of architecture and design for more than 3 decades, and I understand the importance of good design to the places that we live in. In a city like Palm Springs that is known for all of its extraordinary design and architecture, all new design should live up to and aspire to these high standards. I'm really heartened by what I've seen today, the concepts that Mark Rios and his team have presented to us, and I believe that a great park will be our city's new outdoor living room. I'm eager and excited to see this new landscape become part of Palm Springs' iconic city fabric. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hodge. Next is David Vogel, followed by Ron Siegel of Palm Springs.
Hi. Hello, I'm David Vogel, and I'm the present chair of the Measure J Commission. I would like to reiterate what I've heard so far this evening and to also thank the council for inviting Mr. Rios back. I'm very appreciative of the thoughtful designs that have been presented this evening. As you know, the Measure J tax was initially and primarily funded in order to support the creation of the downtown. And as part of that, the downtown park. We believe that the downtown park is iconic, or should be iconic, and should be a visitor destination for the city, the same way that our architecture is. These are beautiful designs, and we're here to say that we support them. As you know, we have, as Measure J, suggested the $3 million that is part of the budget, and we have recently also said to the council that while we're not encouraging you to increase the budget, we are here to support the idea that if the budget has some overages, the Measure J Commission feels that it is very important that this park be as beautiful as we can afford and should be a place that encourages all the visitors that come here to enjoy it, to remember it, and to celebrate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vogel. Next is Ron Siegel of Palm Springs, followed by Eric Cheel. Ron? He was on the front.
He just left, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Okay, Nick, Eric Cheel.
Thank you, City Council, and thank you for opening up this process in this manner to the general public. This is exactly the kind of project that inspires 1,000 comments on my part. Given the time constraints, I'll confine myself to just 2. There were a lot of suggestions that were made in the presentation relative to shade canopies in the gathering areas. And that's certainly essential, and that's one way to cool the temperatures. Another way to cool ambient temperatures is with evaporating water. And I'd like to suggest that it might be worth considering if in the public areas, particularly surrounding the performance space, if something could be built, maybe out of boulders, configured in a specific way so that when water ran over it, it would allow the water to evaporate and cool the immediate areas. In the warmer months, that would allow for cooling while people are watching whatever performance there was going on. And in the cooler months, if they were properly constructed, it would make for additional seating in that area. And because they were built out of boulders or something natural, it would fit with the environment. My second comment is also relative to a performance space, and that is, should there be one, I would think that facing north would be a good placement, because then you would have that enormous canvas of the parking structure wall on which you could create ever-changing projections that would create a nice backdrop for whatever the performance is, and would be performance-specific. You could also hang things from it that would be performance-specific. So those are my suggestions, and I thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Cheel. Ms. Hart, any other speakers want to speak?
No, sir.
Okay, seeing no other additional people requesting to speak, we will close the public comments. Next, City Council discussion. Who wants to kick this off?
I'll jump into it. We are so fortunate to have Mark and his team, and thank you all for the work that you've put into this so far. I think the reason we don't have as many comments as I would have expected, Mark, is I think you bring in things that are so inspiring. I think you brought trust into this room. And yeah, you brought trust, and I think that what's going to be important, and we're not going to know this right away, I guess, until we dig down a little deeper into programming, is exactly what it should be. And you kind of cover all the bases, and the hard part, and the part that we're going to help you with as much as we can, is figuring out what that programming can and should be. So fortunately, with your great experience, you're going to help us with that. We're kind of counting on it. My question to you, Mark, and your team is, a project of this magnitude looks expensive, and in as much as we are so blessed that through Measure J and other means we were able to put together a budget for it, realistically, could any one of these be developed in that price range?
So all of these schemes really represent ideas and attitudes. And I think that any of those schemes can be dialed up financially or sort of dialed down financially, not necessarily to its detriment. There will be some choices we make. We're going to get back numbers that say, well, can we have 4 shade canopies or only 3 shade canopies or 2 shade canopies? We know that we can't have enormous amounts of water. Absolutely, water is an important part of this design. So I think we need first to be clear about where we're going, what are the intentions and our goals, and then we have the budget, and we'll marry those together. And I think that we all are committed to making this happen. And to make it happen, we have to be really thoughtful about hitting a bullseye on the budget.
While you're standing there, this is, from my standpoint, this is going to be Palm Springs' front yard. This is going to be, in the heart of our downtown, and hopefully the place that people really come to gather. And what is the next process? How do we get from here to three really interesting designs to that next programming level of what will actually work and what will be best for our lifestyle? And how do we continue to engage the community in that process?
I think that I'm really looking forward to, after this, we're going to go back and look at all that stuff back there. And it's going to be interesting to see what people think as far as how programmed or how unprogrammed this park wants to be. That's going to tell us a lot. I'd really like to hear from all of you, your sort of attitude about that. I think it definitely needs to have some open space for programming. But I think this is one of the few places in Palm Springs also to just really have a soft garden space. So there's a park in the city. There is a tradition, and we need to study it, of using some of the streets for public events also. So I think we have to look at how we combine those things so the entire park isn't about public events, that it really becomes a garden for the city. But that balance is something we need to really talk about and define.
I wanted to reiterate what Councilmember Roberts said about that we were really, really lucky that we're going to have the opportunity to have a simple canvas there for a while where we can see how people use this space. And a couple of your words at the beginning were on flexibility and a variety of community needs, because we have a tradition in Palm Springs of like the Evening Under the Stars or the Opera in the Park, where depending on what what's being done, whether it's a small event, a large event, stages of various sizes and shapes and locations can be set up fairly quickly and taken down very quickly, and then the park returns to being the living room. And so I think that's really great. And another thing I wrote down when I was listening is one thing that's hard to do on these two-dimensional drawings is get a feeling of the three dimensions. And one thing I think we want to make sure we don't do is block any views of the Palm Springs Art Museum facade, because the Art Museum is probably the crown jewel of mid-century architecture in Palm Springs. And this is like the front yard also of the Art Museum. And we want to make sure that that beautiful, iconic museum is always visible and is really sort of the focus point of that west side of the park. And also, this is a minor detail. One thing that Councilmember Mills has brought up several times in the past, and others have too, is we have, I wrote this down because you commented on tradition in Palm Springs. We do have the gates for the Desert Inn. Do you have any ideas of how to perhaps use those gates somewhere to celebrate that really beginning of the last century?
I've heard about them, and I think the idea of making them have a place in the park is really terrific. I don't know where they might be yet. And so I think the park wants to be layered. It wants to have a whole series of different kinds of events and memories and things you find and discover, lessons you learn. And so while it doesn't want to be a big stew of too many things, it can be curated. It can have a selection of things within it, and the gates are important to the city, so yes.
Okay, another question is, I don't know that much about landscape architecture, but as we start talking about design to cost, which we're doing, will we also be getting an estimate of what the maintenance will cost for us on an ongoing basis? Because depending what we do, it's going to depend on if there's a lot of different plants that are hard to take care of.
Great question.
Sculptures, hardscape that has to be maintained, fountains, etc. That annual cost is going to be I know I'm always bringing up annual costs and money, but that's something we really have to think about.
So one of the most important definitions today of sustainability, that it's holistically sustainable. So that's more than just sort of environmental issues, it's also financial issues. So we'll be looking at all of those things. Any public place takes care and maintenance. It's just inevitable. But understanding how much and where you put the maintenance and where you don't put the maintenance is really a part of the design process. So we will be talking about that and looking at that.
And another question I had is, since we are going to be starting out with the grass and just a very simple space, and then you're going to build on that palette once we see how it's used, would you foresee doing this in stages so the whole park wouldn't be closed and we do everything at once? I mean, will we do this portion and block off a part while that's under construction, then do another portion and then sort of do it in
I
stages?
think we have to look at a couple different sequences, and that may be one sequence to look at. Unfortunately, it costs money to do that because you've extended general conditions. So if we want to get the most money out of things we're building in the park, unfortunately, the way to do it is all at once.
Okay.
Now, you may decide that, okay, it's okay to pay more money to keep part of the park, and you'll do a second phase, but ideally, I think we want to make all decisions, have a really good set of drawings, be really tight about the budget, and just do it in one shot.
Okay, I didn't know, that's why I asked. Mayor Pro Tem?
Mark, I am so excited about this because I've been pretty vocal about the two-circle plan, which I thought had no imagination, and I want all of these. And but one of the questions that I have has to do with how when we first of all, we've only gotten such a small input from the public, and I think this is one of the kind of areas that I think we need a lot of public input on. And so I would love to see us just call a town hall kind of meeting and really advertise it with such short notice for this. We just announced it this morning at the neighborhood group. They've only had a day or so notice of this. And so I think we have a lot of talent that lives in this city and can give a lot of feedback. So that would be one of the things I would be suggesting that we do, is actually have that other meeting, not a council meeting where we're sitting up here, but an actual working meeting where the residents can come in.
We're happy to facilitate anything like that. I agree. Right now is a time we want to get as many opinions as possible. We want everyone just to put it all out there. And then with that, we can start evaluating, prioritizing, understanding it, see how they overlap together. One thing we did, I mentioned the city of Santa Monica. We had a series of public meetings like this, and maybe we would get 50 to 100 responses. And then we had an online presentation. People would go online and they would go through surveys, they would look at information, and we had 500 responses or 800 responses. And it was really helpful doing that. People could do it on their own time, they could look at the drawings, and it was also interesting to see the difference of what information you got from the ones who were there in person and the ones who did it online. And so we cataloged all that information, and it was helpful. So those are all ways, I think, of engaging more people. And it depends on what you think would work for Palm Springs.
That's a great idea. I grew up in Central Park. I mean, that was my hometown, and we never went to Central Park for the event space. It was great event space. I mean, many a concert has been held in Central Park, but there are so many different things that suit so many different people. So at any given time, you can find somebody reading a book, or somebody skating, or somebody giving a little lecture or something. And so there's all sorts of different things that are happening. That's what I would love to see this park be, that kind of a thing. Although we also would love to have that event space. We don't, like in Palm Desert, they have that, not that it's attractive, but I hope nobody here from Palm Springs, the amphitheater kind of thing that they have in Palm Springs.
In Rancho Mirage.
No, not in Rancho Mirage, in Palm Desert, and in their park. And that is a gathering place where they can put things on for the city, and it is kind of somewhat sloped, and that's very nice. But it's kind of all that it's used for, because once there's nothing happening in that stage part, it's just kind of just a big lawn. And so the things that you're talking about, or the possibilities that you're talking about, and I think we have some great fundraisers in this city, because I don't think that budget's going to be enough. I think we need to get some more money from somewhere. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, to add on, that was a great idea about having a big public block party meeting, but perhaps if this park, the basic part of it is done in the late summer, perhaps in the fall, we could have a meeting on the park site where we could, because everybody could see it, they could see the size of it, they could get a feel of it, and I think that would give people more of a feel than looking at a
Well, it all depends on how soon he wants to start working on this. I mean, this is not a lifelong project for Mark, so.
Really important point that you made, and that was about do things in the park, could they hide the museum? But that relates immediately to safety in a park. And I think one of the guidelines we know about making really good urban safe spaces is nothing should really be over like 36 inches tall. And you have to be able to see through the entire park and know that it's really safe. The best kind of safety is this eyes on the park. And so, but it's amazing through topography. If you have something that goes up 36 inches and it slopes down or it raises up, there's a lot of dimension you can do in 36 inches. And so we're going to be very careful to try to make a park that's rich in experience, but also we have to make a park that's as safe as we could possibly can. And visibility is really the key to that. You don't get a lot of shade at 36 inches. Trees are up above it.
I think Maryland's a little taller than 36 inches, so. Councilmember Mills?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we need to take a couple steps back here to our first meeting we had with Mr. Rios with the council. And we established a schedule, in case you don't remember. It was 2 meetings, 2 public meetings. This is number 1. We had another one, input. And then what Mr. Rios was, if I remember correct, was to come back with, from the input he receives now, to come back with some different schemes to look at, receive input on those again, and then really come back with something more detailed, budget conscious, et cetera, like that. So, and the whole idea was, we've got a downtown that's opening here pretty quick, and, we can have a grass area with irrigation on it, but that's not what the purpose of this park is. The park was established initially as an opportunity for downtown events to draw people in, to generate activity in the downtown, plus be everything that we've heard. But it is it's important to get it done, and for the completion of our downtown space. So I just wanted to mention to the council, we had that meeting, we agreed on it. This is our first one. So to talk about meetings in the fall, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I don't think that follows our schedule that we've outlined. I think Mark's idea of the email thing, I think that's something that's very, I get them mixed up. So I think that opportunity certainly is something that could play in well and not really affect the overall schedule. But I think the first thing that we need to get to the designer is a program of what we want. And we talked about it a little last time, but I think we need to revisit it and tell him, look at the functions that have to go in there, that he has to work with. So his fixed areas or parts, that somewhere he needs to make this work into his scheme. And so I wrote down a few of them, and some of them we saw in what Mark has shown us so far. The location of the Illuminaire House is one. The location of the Marilyn Monroe sculpture is another. Events that we have not really defined for him, what size of event, whether it's one spaces, two spaces, or that type of thing. And I hope we can talk a little bit more about that. We talked about toilets, and we talked about allowing for the connection of portable toilets for large events and just day-to-day toilets for day-to-day use, and to give us another opportunity for toilets downtown other than the one that we have. The other thing we talked about was a police substation presence in some way, shape, or form, not a big item, but something that would give our officers essentially a downtown location with some high exposure in the sense that it would be related to the park in some way, shape, or form. And the other thing the mayor brought up that I thought was very important was we discussed the historical significance of that site with the gates from the Desert Inn. I mean, just and so some way to pay a little homage to what that site used to have. So those are the things that we discussed a little bit last time. But I think we need to, in fairness, Mr. Rios, we need to give him direction on that. Doesn't mean it can't change, but it's a starting.
Mr. Fuller, quick question. It could be a while before the grass is in the irrigation, but when will the streets be open such that we and other people can actually freely walk down there and see the scope of the park and what it looks like and the feel of it?
July is what I've been told. So we're paying close attention to the status of that, but hopefully by July.
Okay, because I think that'll be very useful to be able to walk on the streets and look at it and get the feel for the space and the size and the layout. Councilmember Roberts.
I just wanted to add a little bit more to something Councilman Mills said. So one thing we decided earlier in the process when we first sat down with Mark and his team was that we wanted to keep it simple. So in some of the earlier designs that we saw tonight from 2015, we saw any number of buildings. There were police substations. There were different ideas for storage, potentially rooms that could be used for green rooms or food service for events. And where we went with that was that this is going to be an evolving park, and we have a limited budget. And maybe we start with the minimum. We bring in bathrooms that we would need on a daily basis to use the park. We thought, over the long run, it would probably make more sense, and we do this for all of our other events, by the way, is bring things in as we need them for events. So if we need catering, we can bring catering trucks. We can bring in facilities for that. If we need extra bathrooms, we can bring them. If we need just simply, if we needed, mobile type dressing rooms and things like that, we can bring them. And I think it's a great way to start with this. We don't have anything like this yet. We use Palm Canyon as our front yard. And so this is going to be amazing that maybe some of those events can now actually transfer to the park. And I think we're not really going to know for a few years what we really need and how we use this park. And so starting off very, very simply initially, if future councils were to foresee that we need to add a building here and there, that can do that. But I was most excited in one of our first meetings with the concept of starting off gently, starting off slowly, focus more on potentially some event space, and then just daily use, keeping it cool, keeping it comfortable, keeping it appealing, keeping it as an oasis or a break in this, our very urban center now with all these buildings around it. So I just wanted to highlight that because we talked a lot about that in our original designs, our original talks.
Councilman Kors.
And sort of I agree with both of you on that point. And, as you went through this, and I think we started from our last meeting wanting the flexibility to have large events. That was sort of one of the things that was important. And of course, that's where you start, and as you go through it, and each one's fabulous, so we want to do all of them. But I do think the flexibility to be able to have large events is something, at least that I support. I'd like to, of course, get more community input, but it's something I would like to see continue, just to try and get some direction, conversation going here. And so this is useful for you in moving to the next stage. And I think we can do that while keeping it simple, and if over time we see we're not using it that much for that, it gives us flexibility to do other things. Well, it's harder to sort of go the other way, right? Once we have other things in, pull them out. So I'd like to sort of still see that ability, because we have talked about moving things from Palm Canyon into the park and using the park as a way to draw more people to our downtown. That's one of the real goals here, I think. So that's just from my perspective. I do want to note, I've seen a bunch of notice about this sort of on Facebook, but I do think, and this is, by the way, a much bigger turnout than we had 2 days ago for our budget, so that at least is a good thing. Yeah. But, you know, given everyone who's here, who needs to be here for the next meeting, you know, maybe before we leave tonight, we can set another date, because I don't think we want to slow the process down. I think we want to move it forward. And maybe in between that is when we do the online input that all of us, staff, and everyone here can help really push out. Because I'd like to hear a lot more from the community about what people want, what our residents want in the park, because I think that's going to help us make a decision and give you better feedback. So thank you.
One of the things that I think we also need to look at is this is such a small piece of land relative to all the things that we want. And I think we also need to look at maybe relocating some of those things that we want to put there. Like, for instance, I don't think that the police substation has to be there. I could see us renting a space in another building for the police substation. I mean, I want to take as much out of this in that kind of thing that we possibly can. At one point, we even talked about having a ticket booth there, which I don't think is there anymore. That's out. That's good. And you know, maybe a restroom or two or whatever. But there's other places in, you know, in this development now that we have a little leeway with this, with some of the land that's on this development. We also have across the street, which is where now currently the Luminaire House is sited. What else can be on that doesn't have to be in the main park? And so I'd really like the committee to take a look at what in those kinds of things that take up space that could be maybe relocated in other parts of the development.
Perhaps, you know, we can bring things together, like the Illuminaire could end up being Maryland's dressing table, or combine uses. Is that what you're suggesting, Councilwoman Foat?
No, but I am suggesting that maybe we need to bring Mr. Braun in on this and talk a little bit about, is there other places where we could, you know, play some stuff, and you're the same subcommittee, so.
By the way, as we've been talking about doing the temporary park and things like that, he's expressed on many occasions that he very much wants to be part of this park. And it obviously makes a difference for what he's doing. You know, in as much as it's altruistic, that he wants to temporarily give us some sort of surface, whether it be grass or gravel or whatever we do, and that's going to benefit him. He plans to open that hotel and open the streets and the new landscaping around that project by the end of August. So it's important for him to not have a dirt parcel sitting there. But, you know, in conversations that I've had with him as we go through this process, you know, he's offered to even potentially look to help us find sponsors if we need more dollars and be involved. He wants to be, he wants to be involved with it and show his company's goodwill at this point.
Yeah, Councilmember Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am not in agreement with Ms. Foat's suggestion of not having the substation there. First, it doesn't have to take up space. It's even potentially could be located within the parking structure, into it, with observation out. But I think we discussed last time, I think, an unfenced space, if I'm not mistake.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Unfenced space, like it or not, has issues. And the more police presence you have to deal with that potential issue, the better. And I think it's highly important that that a substation with the exposure with exposure to the park is part what we look at, because it will be an issue. And so I think that's a very good way to deal with is establish a presence. Whether there's anybody in there or not, we'll be working on that in June. So, but I think it's important that, I mean, it is not a focal point of the park. I'm not thinking that at all, but I do think that that presence is important. And so, again, whether it could be, I'm sure Mr. Rios and his firm will come back with several different options. And I think, personally, I think if we have to move uses like that, even the toilets, back into the space that's already there and lose a few parking spaces, it might be worth it. And so I think there's different things to
I'm
look
just
at.
trying to get it out of the park.
Okay.
You know, and because also for me, it was the feeling of it, having an office space, the office space that's on Indian with no police officers ever in it does not tend to scare anybody away. And you never see anybody in the office space. It's not the office space, it's the presence in the park. It'll be the way that the park is created, where there's not that, it's not conducive to, you know, tents and bedrolls and whatever. But the important thing for me is that as much of the things, I think all of those things are important, but as much of it that we can figure out, and if we can put it in the parking garage, I think that's a great idea. We could even, you know, you've got all that empty space in where that ramp goes down. I don't know if you could build something over that to even place it in that, over the down ramp, which is wasted space, which we left there, I think, for events, for parking and things of trucks and whatever. And so, I mean, we could even cantilever something over that. But I just am thinking that with such a small space, and I looked at all those numbers that were on these other parks, and our little 2,600, and my favorite Yiddish word is verstunkene park, we have to, you know, utilize as much of it as we can. And so...
Did you really just really define our park as Verstunkene? Okay.
You know, and I think we saw a couple ideas in the slides that Mr. Rios showed about uses really tucked under the park, and so I'm sure he's churning on all this stuff. But I think, we need to give him a program. We need to tell him what he needs to work with.
We've got, you know, $5.3 million burning a hole in our pocket. And, you know, as we spend our life trying to find money and fund everything,
Exactly.
we actually have this, how fortunate we are to have this pool of money where most cities are scrambling just to get near the level of services that we provide on a daily basis. So we're fortunate in this time. So, you know, I'm not going to say fast track, but I think, Mark, you're ready to go. We're ready to work with you. You know, it's why we're kind of pushing the community. We want to get feedback. We want to kind of get going on this. Mark, what else do you need from us right now?
I think a defined program would be really fantastic, so thank you for that. Getting the public involved is essential. And if we put this online, one of the things that might be really helpful is to say it is an online event for 1 week, or it's an online event for 10 days. So then it's publicized and it says the online event is starting on this day and it's ending on this day. Everybody go online and make comments, because then you actually get something. I know that a lot of times if things are posted over the summer, it's just not going to be very helpful or effective. I think we should try to develop a schedule. I realize summer is upon us, and that really changes sort of meeting schedules. But I think in the next short period of time, if we could get this up online and have some sort of defined, publicized online event, that would be a way to take a next step.
Could we have the subcommittee work with Mr. Rios and come up with refine the schedule? And Councilmember Mills, as you said, we have a schedule, but redefine it and make sure that we're on track.
This kind of skeleton schedule that we've worked out, and I just didn't think to bring that file tonight with me, but we can definitely refine that. And, the great thing, I love this idea about putting it online and maybe making it interactive, or at least giving people opportunities to walk through everything we've seen tonight at their own time. And, the good news is it doesn't matter where you are. If people are going away this summer, they're going to still have access online. It's never too hot to be online. And they can give us our ideas and input. And I also love your ideas of giving deadlines for that. If you have something you want in this park, or you have a great idea, and I already heard a few good ideas here tonight for as few people that spoke, we need to get those ideas in. So I think that's what we should focus on. I know Dr. Reddy will be very instrumental in helping us get that up and get it up quickly.
I think, JR, along that line, we have a real IT department, and put them together with Mark, because it sounds like you've done this before. It sounds like something that maybe would be up pretty quickly.
Yeah, well, and we already have the presentation. I mean, Mark, you did the hard work.
Our IT person is here tonight, too, over there, so he can figure that all out.
Aaron, is your car running?
Mr. Rios, when you did this thing online, would you anticipate any of these proposed designs could possibly be done with CAD, so they'd be somewhat three-dimensional, so people could get a feel for if they're standing in the park and what they'd be seeing, instead of just a flat plan?
Say yes. To be honest, I don't think we know enough about it to actually do it in a kind of meaningful way. Maybe the next version, we could start showing it more three-dimensionally.
As much as I like Mr. Rios' work, we don't want to use all our money for him. Because that is costly.
Okay.
And I think there, as he's saying, there's a point where that needs to happen, but we're not there yet. So.
Any other comments? Okay, so you guys, because it's a regular, once you guys come up with a firmed up schedule, you can bring that up at a subcommittee meeting at the regular city council meeting, then we'll rock and roll.
We'll give regular updates, and I know Amy, working with Aaron, will get this website up and really shoot it out there. And we'll just continue giving updates on it and keep it moving. And Flynn will move the whole project through our planning division really quickly.
In their spare time.
Also come up with another meeting date as soon as possible, so that there's much more advance notice than there was for tonight.
Mark, is that something we want to do right now for the benefit of the public? Is that something we want to go ahead and do? Get something on our calendar?
I think it needs to be after we have this online event, with enough time that we can take that online information and actually do something with it so it's meaningful. So I think we should probably refine the schedule, put that into it, and then choose a date. I'd like to do it now, but I think we need to be careful so the information's really used.
Well, if I could, Mayor, just as a sort of a general time frame, Mark, are we probably looking mid to late July to the next meeting, or before that, if you had to sort of order of magnitude?
If we do an online event and we take this information, I think we're looking at maybe 5 weeks before we'd be ready to have another meeting. That's including the online event, taking that information, doing something with it. So your date's about right.
What, Amy, a few weeks to get this up, and 2 weeks for you to get this up and on, and
so then we're probably talking, I think 10 days, I think, would be a great time for the online event. 2 weekends to participate, and that's it. And then we probably need 2 weeks to take that information and generate some design ideas. We can have a meaningful presentation like this. So that's probably a 6-week time period.
Mark, what?
It's so smart, he's immediately saying, we need to meet with the subcommittee during that time so that you can see our work and our process.
Mm-hmm. We'll meet with you daily, Mark.
I was going to ask Mr. Rios if he thinks programmatically you've heard enough from the 5 of us to give you a flavor of where you need to go.
I've heard that we need to make this place flexible, we need to make it simple, we need to let it grow as it defines itself over time. Those are all really good comments. The comments about Central Park, I think, are really important. Central Park is probably 20% event space and 80% park space. And so this place, my gut feeling is it shouldn't be more than 50% event space. And we need to have at least 50% of it as park or garden space. And so I think we're going to start taking all these comments, we're going to look at it from that point of view. It shouldn't be 75% event space, because this is all the space you have for a park in the city. So we're going to probably look at some options, but that's how I would start and balance it from the information I've heard tonight.
And I think, Mark, your comment, you showed us in the schemes that you increase your event space by using the streets, and that's a simple way to do it. I mean, it's got a few drawbacks, but that's an opportunity to use something that's usually vehicular and make it usable event space, which again gives us that flexibility.
You know, and I'd like to add that I want this to not be defined in people's heads as we would say define a ballpark, where, okay, cool, it's great when we're there, and then it's just this unused place. I'd like this to be thought of as one of those places that when people come to visit Palm Springs, very much like, say, when they went to Sunnylands, you go to see the gardens there, that this is a world-class garden or place that is one more gemstone in the crown that makes Palm Springs unique, different than any other city. We continue to be that. And adding something like this, and I'm going to say it, hopefully the CV link, things that make us and keep us truly unique and give people, all people, an opportunity to have a great moment without it costing anything.
So all of that is our goal, believe me. But we have to balance making it simple and flexible, and it can grow into something. That's a little bit different from making it iconic and really stand out. Not that you can't do both of those things. We want to do both of those things.
Yes.
And so the park has to have some iconic, immediate kind of immediacy that when it's done, for the first time somebody comes there, they've arrived. And so we're going to balance both those things, but we want to deliver something that really is special from day one, but make it simple. But it can't be anonymous. It needs to have a point of view.
The world has very high expectations of us. We have to keep those standards high.
Okay, any other comments on this item? Okay, do we have any
Mayor-
council member comments, requests, or reports in general?
Mayor, if I
Oh,
could
I'm
just,
sorry.
if we would kind of look at your schedule, Mark, just working around the council's normal schedule, potentially, if you would start thinking about potentially either, it could be the off weeks of June 28th or July 12th. So I don't know if you could, if you want to commit to one of those now, but that would, I think, be the time frame. Mark?
Yes, I think we can work with either of those. And if we go at the end of June, we've just got to work really fast right now to get that website up. And it really depends on how quickly you think that can happen.
Dr. Reddy, what were those dates again?
Potentially June 28th or July 12th. Those are off Wednesdays that council doesn't have meetings. So I'll coordinate with Mr. Rios in his office. We'll get that up immediately, and we'll work with your schedules to see if one of those dates. Now, certainly we could do a different date during the week as well.
And this doesn't have to be super elaborate. We use SurveyMonkey all the time. It's something over the next week we can get on the phone together and get that PDF chopped up, put some questions with it, and really move it along.
Thank you.
Give any of us a call, you know where to find us, and we'll make sure it gets up right away.
Yeah.
We do have a head of IT who's here with us tonight, who can help put, could you introduce yourself to them before the meeting ends? And he can really do something for you fast.
Aaron, that's more of those other duties is assigned, yes. Okay, anything else? Okay, well, seeing nothing else, going on. The City Council will adjourn to the next regular meeting on Wednesday, May 17th at 6 o'clock, preceded by closed session at the Palm Springs Convention Center. That will be in Primrose B, which is a change to what this says here. So Primrose B, and we are adjourned. Thank you.